Hi, this is Chris Smither with John Broughton on Retrospectives. This is Casey Radio 97.7 FM.
Now, you grew up in New Orleans. What are your earliest memories of music striking a chord with you there?
Well, it's funny, but one of the earliest memories that I have never even came to the surface until I finished this last record. And on the song No Love Today, there's a fruit and vegetable huckster.
Oh, yeah.
And he used to come down my street when I was a little kid, and I'd hear him singing in the street, and you could hear him coming when he was streets away because he had such a huge voice, and he used to scare me to death. But I remember him very clearly. And I remember a blind man playing the guitar in front of the Woolworths on Oak Street. Mm-hmm. I think that's probably the earliest memories that I have.
I believe your uncle also had a lot to do with you becoming interested in music.
Yeah, he did. Well, he didn't have so much. He had to do with teaching me how to play. I was very interested in it, but he was actually quite a good teacher in that he didn't give me too much. He just really simplified things. He taught me 3 chords, taught me how to hear changes, and said, there you go, with 3 chords you can play almost any song and if you learn another one you can rule the world. So unfortunately I learned more than one more, so my plans for world domination came to an abrupt halt. But
what happened? What do you think it was specifically about blues and roots-related music that caught your attention?
Well, actually, blues, I didn't really get into blues per se until I was in my teens, but the thing that appealed to me when I first heard people like Lightnin' Hopkins and Robert Johnson, Skip James, people like that, was that it was so closely related to rock and roll. I mean, I grew up in the 50s and 60s, and so basically I was a child of rock and roll, but I never wanted to be in a band. And when I heard these people playing solo rock and roll, it was like a dream come true. I just couldn't believe it. I said, these guys are playing rock and roll all by themselves.
Was there a particularly motivating factor that prompted you to move from New Orleans when you did?
Well, basically because at the time that I left New Orleans, which was in 1966, nobody was listening to this kind of music at all. To blues, they weren't. I mean, in New Orleans at that time, and still to a certain extent, is not really a guitar town. It's horns and keyboards, and I just wanted to, people would listen to me playing all this old blues stuff, and they'd say, well, that's quaint, Chris. What are you going to do for a living? So I went up to the Northeast, which was experiencing a whole revival of acoustic music of all sorts, including blues, and so and I've been here ever since. I came up here when I was about 22.
Right, so it wasn't really a tough decision to go then?
No, not really.
Can you just relate for us what the scene was like there when you arrived?
When I got to Boston?
Yeah, the music scene there.
Well, it was, it was a funny kind of a period because I'd gotten here a little bit late to be in on the whole Bob Dylan, Joan Baez kind of explosion. It was towards the tail end of that, and actually what was happening in the next couple of years, everybody's attention was turning to California and all the kind of folk rock and roll that was coming out of California. But there was enough of it left going on. There was a club scene where I could get gigs as a relative, newcomer and unknown. And I managed to become established to the point where I wasn't entirely buried, and by this influx of rock and roll with bands, and I managed to hang on long enough to become somewhat established, and I've just been here ever since. And then, of course, after about 10 or 12 years, everything started coming back to. There was a subsequent re-emergence of singer-songwriters and acoustic-based musicians, which we're enjoying right now. So I find myself in a pretty nice position.
How was the feeling among the artists there during that time? Was it quite competitive? Or was there a real sense of community amongst them all?
I would say that there was a sense of community. I mean, there's always a certain sense of competition, but if you stay at it long enough, you realize that there really isn't any point in that. I mean, it's not really a competitive business. It's only competitive insofar as you make it so in your own head. There's really room for everybody as long as you're doing something that's good and to a certain extent original. If you have your own sound, there's no end of space for everybody.
Sure. Now, you had some label problems after your second album. I believe your label went under at that stage.
Well, I didn't actually go under. I switched labels to United Artists. I went from a small label to a very big label, But I just finished the album for them, and United Artists was bought by Transamerica Corporation, and they dissolved it. So, yeah, essentially, United Artists ceased to exist as a record company, and so the record got buried with it. And then I spent about the next 10 or 12. I was already sort of heavily into alcohol and drugs, and it pretty effectively scuttled my life for the next 10 years. So I can't blame it all on corporate America.
No. You ever stop and ponder how your career may have turned out the other way had the label kept going?
I haven't really given it much thought. I don't know. I don't know. I'm reasonably happy now.
Yeah.
And so if you sort of subscribe to the belief that everything that happens to you, that where you are now is the end product of everything that has happened to you, then I suppose I should be grateful. Because anything that leads to a place that makes you happy is probably for the best in the long run.
In the long run, all's well that ends well. Yeah.
Yeah.
Tell us about that unreleased third album. Is it ever likely to see the light of day?
It might. I have to say from the top that I'm not that interested in seeing it again, because most of the songs that I am really interested in on it, I've re-recorded on subsequent records.
Okay, yeah.
Unfortunately, they don't have people like Lowell George or Dr. John. I mean, I could still do a record that has Dr. John on it, but I'll never be able to have Lowell George play guitar again.
Yeah, true.
And so there are some things there that are kind of irreplaceable, but my fans would really like to see it. I wouldn't mind seeing it come out just so that some of my fans could get a hold of it, but from a personal standpoint, it doesn't really bother me that much.
So it's not as if the tapes are missing or anything like that, but it could be real.
As far as I know, they're still sitting in the vault. They belong now to Capitol Records. I think Capitol bought the entire catalog from United Artists, and they're sitting down in the vault at Capitol.
Now, you were a long time off the recording scene in terms of releases through the late 70s and the early 80s. How active were you otherwise musically during that time?
Well, I was still playing, but I would probably maybe do 2 or 3 gigs a month, something like that, and I didn't have anybody representing me for a long period of time. I was making a living building houses, doing construction work. But, I never put the guitar down. I mean, there seems to be, some people have the idea that there was a period when I just didn't do anything musically, and that was never the case, but I was certainly nothing like as active as I am now.
Just speaking to you now, it doesn't seem like you regret that time, looking back on lost time or anything like that.
Well, I've spent a lot of time trying to figure out how not to regret it. It's kind of fruitless, If I spend time worrying about that, then I don't have time to enjoy what all the good stuff that's happening to me now.
That's
mean, it's too bad, but it's kind of like, there's people who have, life-threatening diseases that take them out of circulation for just as long, and they don't regret it. I mean, they're just glad they got well.
Now, there's often a nice balance of originals and covers on your recordings. What qualities do you seek in a song to make it one that you choose to cover?
Well, that's a little bit hard to say. I'm not conscious of of a lot of it. Although I have to say that often they are songs that I wish I'd written. I listen to it and think, if I'd just gotten there sooner, I could have written that one.
Yeah.
But at the same time, they have to be songs that I can add something to, that I think subconsciously I hear it, and whether I'm aware of it or not, I'm already thinking, there's something that I would have done different here. And most of the covers that I do come out, fairly radically changed. In fact, I often don't mean to make them, to change them quite as radically as they wind up being changed in the end, but it's not enough just to like the song. For instance, I can listen to Ray Charles sing Drown in My Own Tears, and it's one of my favorite things I've ever heard on record, but I would never dream of doing it because I just don't think I could do anything important to it that he hasn't already done.
Yeah. Now, on the other hand, there's also been many other artists that have covered your songs, which must be pleasing to you as a songwriter to see your songs represented by a cross section of artists.
Oh, that's the best thing that can happen to a songwriter, obviously, is because that's the only indication that you have that the songs have really achieved a life of their own, that they exist without you walking around holding their hand. It's the affirmation, that you've created something that stands on its own.
Any covers there that really stand out to you, that really hold a special place for you?
Well, Bonnie Raitt's versions of the two songs that Bonnie Raitt has done of mine are, I think, just great. Well, one of them is great because it's got Little George playing guitar on it. He's one of my favorite all-time players, and they hold a special place for me simply because they just did a lot for me in terms of my career. They were real, just a real help, professionally speaking. Recently, Emmylou Harris did one that is just, it's totally wonderful. I love the way she did it. She did it as part of a soundtrack album for a movie called The Horse Whisperer, which I don't know whether that's shown up in Australia.
Yeah, it has, yeah.
But the soundtrack album is a lot better than the movie, take my word for it. And in fact, the album is done better than the movie, and it's quite a nice thing, Plus, it's the sort of thing that brings you to the attention of other people who are looking for songs to cover. So.
Oh, sure. Do you ever write songs with other artists in mind when you're writing them?
No, I write them for me to do. I might have a little more luck getting them covered if I did it the other way, but I'm essentially writing for myself.
Now, talking about the songwriting process, has songwriting got any easier for you as you've got older?
That's an interesting question. I was trying to decide that the other day, whether it's gotten easier or whether I've just gotten better at it. I think I have gotten better at it. It used to be that when I finished writing a song, I would be panic-stricken because I would think, that's the last one, there isn't any more, it'll never happen again. And then I would write another one, and then I'd go through this whole kind of panic attack all over again. And the last couple of batches of songs, because I tend to write them in batches, for a record, and I'll write 7, 8, 9 of them at once over a 6-month, 7-month period. And the last couple of times that I've gone through this process, it hasn't been anything like as intimidating as it used to be. It still seems like it's an enormous amount of work, and it looms over me as a task that's going to take everything that I've got. But I no longer have this inner fear that I'm not going to be able to do it. I'm convinced that I can do it. So there's something happening there. Something's changed. My perception of the difficulty, or just my perception of my own ability to do it, has changed. But I'm not sure that it's really gotten any easier, if I'm making any sense.
What quality or aspect of a song is most important to you as its writer to get just right?
What is most important to get just right?
Yeah.
The lyrics, I think. Actually, the whole thing, it has to work, obviously, as a whole. If any one part of it falls down, either the harmonic rhythm or the tempo or the lyrics, if any one of those things is at odds, then it keeps the whole thing from really working. In a way, you want to finish a song and get it to the point where people are, the average listener is really unaware of how much went into it, how much thought went into it, and how much effort. It should come across fairly seamlessly, and if any one of the things is out of line, then it's going to prevent that from happening. But I must say that, for myself, the most important part of it is the lyrics. But I think about the lyrics harder than I think about anything else.
And how do you gauge for yourself when you know a song is right and ready?
People don't throw things at me when I play.
So you do like to road test new material first? Get an audience reaction?
Oh yeah, very much so. I don't get as much of a chance anymore to play it in front of people before I record it as I used to. Of course, that's one of the advantages of being a non-recording artist. When you're younger, you get to build up a huge catalog of material, and then when you make your first record, you get to select the 10 or 12 very best ones, And then as time goes on and you're pressured to produce an album at least every 2 years, if not more frequently, you don't quite have that luxury. But yeah, to me it's best. It's always best to be able to take the songs out on the road for a while and play them, preferably over a period of at least several weeks to a month, so that you can make adjustments to them. Because sometimes you'll have a line that you just think is absolutely killer. It's a great lyric. It says exactly what you want it to, and you cannot believe that nobody's picking up on it. Nobody gets it. So you start tinkering around and you say, "No, what is it? There's a word here that they're not hearing, or somehow it's not getting across." And then sometimes you just make the most minor shift, and all of a sudden everybody gets it. But if you go right into the studio and record it, you might never get that chance.
Your guitar style, are there any players in particular that had a profound influence over your guitar technique?
Well, in the beginning, the two big ones that I always bring up are Lightnin' Hopkins and Mississippi John Hurt. Two very different players, two very different styles, and you can find bits and pieces of both of them throughout what I do. I'm sure that there's tons more, that I'm not consciously aware of, but those were my two main people right in the beginning, and what I have as a guitar style now came as a synthesis of them plus whatever other influences.
I believe you've done instructional videos on guitar playing too, haven't you?
Only one.
Just the one?
Only one so far.
Would you have liked
successful though?
Would you have liked a facility like that to be available to you when you were learning yourself, provided by one of your guitar idols?
I would have loved it.
Yeah.
I would have totally loved it. Although in a way, I'm not so sure that I'm not so sure it's smart. I did it because a lot of people asked me to, and I wasn't very confident about my ability to my abilities as a teacher. But it's been very successful, and people seem to find it extremely helpful. But at the same time, I'm a little bit torn about it, a little bit conflicted about it, because part of the way that I developed my own style was in trying to play things that were a total enigma to me. I would hear Lightnin' Hopkins or John Hurt or any of the other players play a song, and I'd say, "How's he doing that?" And I would fiddle with it until I came up with an approximation. It was almost like fakery of a sort. But the ironic thing is that the fakery itself, if it's good enough, becomes a stylistic innovation in its own right. And so I think sometimes if detailed videotapes of how somebody does something becomes available, it kind of prevents you from developing your own approach to things. Now, I don't know if that's a real complaint or not, but it's just kind of ironic that that here I make these videos and at the same time I can see drawbacks to it.
With one of them under your belt now, have you got plans to do more?
I think I may well do another one. It's been fairly successful, and I don't mean really successful monetarily. It doesn't really amount to a whole lot of money. It's just that people are just so gratified to get them, and the expressions of approval that I've gotten from people are so numerous. The students write me letters all the time and say, I've had more fun with this than I've had with yada yada yada, so forth and so on. And so, it just makes me happy. And and now I'm starting to. It's been out for a couple of years, and I'm starting to get notes and letters and fan mail from people looking for another one, and it's not a great deal of work, to turn them out, as it turns out, because basically all I have to do is put down on tape what I'm doing anyway and just try to explain it. In fact, it's the only comfortable producer-artist relationship I've ever had. Before I met Stephen, I had no idea that you could actually have fun making a record. Used to be just torture, I looked at it as final exam time.
Yeah.
And here's where they find out just how bad I am, and here's where I find out how incapable I am of communicating with other musicians. And the first time I sat down with Stephen, he told me, he said, we're going to have a lot of fun. And that didn't compute to me. That was an oxymoron, a fun record, But I went into it, and I did have fun. And it's gotten to the point now where we don't even, we communicate on a very subtle level. We hardly really have to discuss things very much at all. We just sort of communicate in nods and shakes of the head, and it all seems to happen at about the same time. I mean, if I shake my head, I look over and he's shaking his head too, so we go, nope, that won't do.
There's a real understanding there.
Yeah, it's very comfortable.
You think that Stephen, being a fellow musician himself, that's an advantage, I guess, in terms of it's easy for him to understand your needs as an artist in the studio?
It's a huge advantage. Well, for one thing, he's a wonderful guitar player, and he shows up on several tracks on every record. And the other advantage is that we actually, when we first met each other, which was 25 years ago, we had a great deal in common. We had listened to the same sort of people. We had a lot of fun playing together, and so he has a very firm grasp of what it is that I like about my music. And so when it comes to production and expanding the sound, he doesn't step on things that are important to me. He doesn't cover up anything that is going to distress me. He understands about leaving the guitar and the vocal out front, and he understands that when I bring him a song, basically it's a finished piece. It is the way it will be when I present it to people live, and so what informs his production is a desire to expand on the sound that's there, but at the same time make sure that people don't miss the band when they see me live.
Now, I believe you like to work rather quickly in the studio, is that right?
Oh yeah, I do. Well, I learned that from Stephen.
Yeah.
That's part of what makes it fun, is because we work quickly, we don't labor over things and hack them to death.
Do you think there is a general tendency these days for many to get bogged down in the studio and spend too long in there?
Yeah, there is, but it's a natural sort of a thing because, life takes on, the studio takes on a life of its own. And playing in the studio takes on a life of its own that begins to supersede, what happens on stage, what happens live, and it's a very easy thing to fall into, particularly if you've got enough money to do it. It's a wonderful place to hang out. There's also a tendency that a lot of people have to go in and finish material or even write the whole song in the studio, which is makes the material extremely studio dependent in order to to bring it across. And and things just get worked to death. They lose any kind of spontaneity that they have. One of the reasons that we like to work so quickly when we're putting things together is that things sound fresher when the musicians are playing competently on a song, but they're still learning it. They're still excited about it. They haven't settled down into some kind of a worn groove on it. They're still finding out things about it, and you can hear the excitement. You can hear the freshness in it when it's done that way.
With this album, did you go into the studio with any set game plan of something that you wanted to achieve with this one that perhaps hadn't with one of the previous albums?
I did want to have some vocal harmonies on it. I'd never had that on a record before. So, we did that. As far as preconceived notions about how I wanted them to sound, and Stephen wanted to use horns. He kept hearing, he says, I hear horns on this stuff, and I was extremely dubious at first, but it worked out very much to my satisfaction. I wasn't really dubious, I just didn't know what it was going to sound like.
Yeah.
I was curious.
Now, I believe you'll be down our way for the Port Fairy Festival.
Yes, I will. Looking forward to it a great deal.
How do you like playing festival audiences? I guess because you'd often be playing to an audience that hasn't specifically come to see you. Did you find that difficult at times?
I like it. I find it, challenging. It's besides that, when you play to an audience that's never heard you before and doesn't know anything about you, then they haven't heard your jokes either. So it's easier to talk to them. No, but I've only been to Australia once, and I enjoyed it very much, and that was 3 years ago, and I'm sort of eagerly anticipating a return.
Well, Port Fairy is a wonderful festival. It's probably a premier folk festival, so and the audiences there come from all over the country, so you'll have a great time down there. Do you vary your shows for a festival audience as say you would for a club show?
Well, I do sometimes. If it's billed as a general folk festival or acoustic festival, I'll play just about anything that I do. If it's a blues festival, and for instance, I'm going to Canada to play a blues festival in a couple of days in Ottawa, and I concentrate more on the very bluesy things, just maybe a little bit. I don't go overboard on it, but I'll tend to flavor it a little more that way.
How would you compare yourself on stage now to say 15, 20 years ago?
Oh, all the difference in the world.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, I'm very comfortable now, and it's just I feel like I'm in my element. It's what I like to do. I go up. I like to perform. First place, I like to get up in front of people and say, "All right, trust me. I'm going to take you on a trip for 40 minutes or an hour or whatever, and be able to do it. It's not a. I think it just, a lot of it had to do with, a certain amount of confidence, and that comes only after years of doing it, of course. But also, there comes a point when for a lot of performers, and I'm no exception, where all of a sudden you realize that audience-performer relationship is not adversarial at all. The audience wants you to be good. It's almost palpable. You can feel them wanting you to be good.
Yeah.
Because they don't want to have to hold you up. And once you realize that there's that sort of pool of psychic sympathy out there, then it becomes extremely easy to make them happy. and to make yourself happy.
Okay, Chris, look, I won't keep you any longer. I want to thank you for your time today.
Oh, not a problem at all. Thank you.
It's been a treat talking with you. Congratulations on the new album. It really is wonderful.
Thank you.
And we look forward to seeing you down here again. And I assume you'll be doing some club shows when you're down here as well?
Oh, I certainly hope so. I hate to come all that way and only do one festival.
Just for the one festival, yeah. That'll be great. We look forward to it.
All right.
Okay, look after yourself till then, and we'll see you when you get here.
Thanks a lot.
Take care.
Bye.
Bye.